In terms of the general theories of the relation between mind and body, philosophers have counted from 1 to 2. Either there's just one thing in the world, mind and body are the same thing, or there are 2 things. Mind is one thing and body is another thing. So we'll start with ways of counting to 1, and I'll start with a theory that Blackmore doesn't talk about but is really important for the philosophy, the history of philosophy of mind, and that's idealism. Idealism is the view that everything is composed of ideas. There are no material things, they're just ideas. And the basic objection to the idealist view is that it seems like there are actual things that exist even when no one is perceiving them. So it seems like there's a table here even if everybody leaves the room and then we come back in. So it doesn't seem like it's all ideas. It does seem like, there are tables and chairs and things that exist. So that's one way of counting to 1. And the other way that we're going to be thinking of most significantly in terms of counting to 1 is going to be materialism. And materialism is the opposite of idealism. Materialists say that all there is material stuff. There are no ideas, in the sense that things that are ideas, are actually physical stuff. And the objection to the materialist position is the opposite of the objection to the idealist position, in that it seems like ideas are different. It seems like ideas are not physical things, and so that's a worry in terms of explaining everything in terms of a single thing. It seems like they're different sorts of things. And that brings us to the way of counting to 2, which is dualism. Dualism is 2. Dualists argue that mind and body are different, yet they interact. So even though they are different kinds of thing or different kinds of property, and we'll talk about 2 different kinds of dualism in a minute, they are still interacting. And so then the question is what exactly is the difference? What exactly are mind and body? The first kind of dualism is substance dualism, where mind and body are 2 different kinds of thing. They're 2 different kinds of substance. And this was Descartes' way of thinking about mind and body that we talked about, and he argued they were essentially different in the way they are thought about, that their nature is absolutely different. And the problem for a substance dualist is that there's no way for mind and body to causally interact if they're absolutely different. There's a principle in physics called causal closure, which is that the energy within a system is set. You can't add energy to it or take away energy from it. It's set. It is conservation of energy is how they talk about it. And so that means that you can't have some force like the mind adding any energy to the system by making something move, like your brain states, because that would add some energy. There would have to be some causal force coming from somewhere other than from the previous physical interaction. And so that's a serious problem for substance dualism, the problem of causal interaction. And so some have tried to capture the advantages of dualism, this intuitive sense that mind and body are different, that we can't explain the one in terms of the other, by talking about the dualism as a dualism of properties instead of a dualism as things. Property dualism is the view that there are mental and physical properties. They're both properties of a single substance, maybe even properties of a physical substance. That's usually how it's cast these days. But mental properties cannot be reduced to physical properties. And this idea of reduction of the mental to the physical is something that is tricky, that of reduction is tricky because there are different ways to think about what is being reduced and how it's being reduced. And so we can think about dual properties in 2 different ways. We can think about it as a matter of metaphysics. Metaphysics is a theory of reality. Ontology is a branch of metaphysics. It's a theory of being. Ontos is being. So metaphysics tells us what the nature of reality is. And so if the nature of mental properties is fundamentally different from the nature of physical properties, then you have a metaphysical dualism, which is what arguably a dualist position has to hold. Alternatively, we can think about the apparent dualism between properties as a matter of epistemology. Epistemology is the theory of knowledge. It's how we know about things. So if what is at issue between the mental and physical is a matter of knowledge, how we know about mental properties is different from how we know about physical properties, then we don't have a metaphysical dualism. We don't have a dualism about the nature of things. And so we could say it's a materialist view, that our problem is a knowledge problem rather than a matter of physical problems. So a dualist is going to maintain a dualism of metaphysics, and a materialist is going to say that the issue, if there is an issue at all about reduction, is an issue of epistemology. So this is going to come back in a couple of different times as we talk about what's known as the explanatory gap. The explanatory gap is a problem of explaining how the mind could be physical. This is the problem that the materialists have. The materialist says there's only one thing, physical thing, but it seems like there are ideas which are non-physical, and that seeming is an explanatory seeming. We don't understand how mental properties, particularly consciousness, how consciousness could be physical. How could our minds and our ways of experiencing ourselves in the world, how could that be something that is just brain processes? This is the fundamental problem that we'll be talking about this entire semester. And this is the problem that these various theories are trying to address. This is the explanatory gap. So this is basically the problem that we'll be dealing with all semester. How can we explain consciousness in terms of brain processes? Is it because the problem is metaphysical? There are extra kinds of substances or properties that are mental and they can't be explained in terms of the physical? Or is the problem epistemological, that we know about mental properties in a different sort of way that we know about physical properties? If the problem is metaphysical, then dualism is true, and we just have to accept that there are two different kinds of stuff, and we'll talk about different ways that we can think about how that works. If the problem is epistemological, then we need to think about how to think about those different properties, think about why our knowledge is different of physical properties and mental properties, and what that means in terms of explaining consciousness in terms of brain processes. So thinking about property dualism, we can think about two different theories of property dualism. So the general approach to the mind-body problem is dualism. There are two. There can be substance dualism, two different kinds of things. There can be property dualism, two different kinds of properties. And then among property dualist theories, then we can talk about, how are you going to talk about these two different kinds of properties? Epiphenomenalism is the first kind of property dualism. Epiphenomenalists say that there are mental properties that are extra kinds of properties, cannot be reduced to physical properties, and they are produced by physical properties, but they have no causal role themselves. They don't cause anything. So when you are having a mental property, you're having an experience right now, you're watching me, which means that you're having some auditory experience, you're having some visual experience, maybe you're eating something while you're watching this video. You're having these different kinds of experiences in addition to all the stuff that's going on physically in your brain and your digestion and your ears and so forth. In addition to all those physical goings on, then they produce this offshoot, which is your experience, your mental experience of this event. Now, that mental experience isn't doing any work. It doesn't have any causal consequences. It doesn't, the deliciousness of whatever you're eating or the amazing interest with which my words are generating, your fascination with the theory of consciousness, none of that stuff is having any effect. Your brain is still working, and that's having causal effect. So if you're really interested in this idea, you're really puzzled by this idea, then your brain is doing things, your neurons are doing things that are causing you to think more, or causing you to get upset, or causing different things. But your experience of the lecture, your feelings about it, are not having any causal role. That's the epiphenomenalist position. And the worry with the epiphenomenalist position, the basic objection to it, is that we can't even explain our curiosity about them. We can't even explain why the mind is a puzzle if they have no causal power, because the fact of consciousness is not causing any puzzles, and so one wonders exactly what where this puzzle came from if our consciousness doesn't have any causal power to cause puzzles about consciousness, and also just the sort of basic sense that our feelings about things, our experience of things does have a causal effect. It seems like the deliciousness of food causes me to want to eat more of it. The experience of a beautiful day causes me to want to spend more time in that beautiful day. It causes me to wonder about, how the blue of the sky looks blue, even though I know, in fact, it's not blue. These kinds of things. It seems like it's my experience of the blueness of the sky that causes these kinds of thoughts. So this is a worry. This is the objection with the epiphenomenalists, that it seems like there's causal power, and if it didn't have any causal power, then why are we even having these puzzles? Last kind of property dualism is one that Blackmore doesn't talk about in this chapter, but is really important to understanding Dave Chalmers' view. She does talk about Chalmers, and Chalmers will come up regularly throughout the semester. His view is that dualism is a matter of panpsychism, that we explain the properties, the causal force and the way in which mental properties work in terms of a basic sense in which fundamental physics has extra mental properties. So absolutely everything. The pan is all, and psychism is psyche. So everything, all things have a psychological property. So your self has consciousness, has psychological properties, and also your arm has them, and your fingernail has them, and also, things have them. My pen has mental properties. So everything has mental properties. And then the problem for the panpsychist is, number one, that's implausible, but also, because, people get wrapped around it and they start to think, yeah, maybe this is the explanation. But there's also the problem of what's the difference between something like a pen. If a pen has mental properties, it certainly doesn't have mental properties in the same way that I have mental properties. And so there's still the problem of explaining what that difference is. What is the difference between the way in which some things operate in the world and the way in which I operate in the world? And even one of the things that we'll be looking at in this course is the ways I operate in the world differently in different kinds of situations. I am different when I'm asleep. To me, it seems like I'm not at all conscious when I'm in dreamless sleep. We'll talk about dreaming and how that's a little different, but it seems like in dreamless sleep, then there is no consciousness. I'm still alive, and I still have various physical properties, and there are things going on. I still retain my memories, so I don't have different memories when I wake up than I did when I go to sleep, but I'm not conscious, and it seems like there's a difference between my mental properties when I'm unconscious and my mental properties when I'm conscious, and that still needs some explanation. So it seems like panpsychism still has some work that it needs to do. So this is the overview of our general theories of the mind-body relation. We have one, idealism or materialism, or we have two, dualism, and you can be a substance dualism like Descartes or a property dualist. And then we have two different kinds of property dualists. You can be either a epiphenomenalist or a panpsychist. So this is the general structure so far of our theories, and we'll look at specific kinds of theory, specific kinds of materialist theories later in the semester to give us even more dimension in terms of how are we going to think about the relation between mind and body. But you should already start thinking about which approach seems to make most sense to you, which way of thinking about the relation between mind and body makes most sense. As I said in the introduction, there's going to be a problem with every view, so what you want to do is think about the theory and think about what objections to the theory. I've given you objections to every single theory so far, and I will continue to do that. There's always a problem, and so you're going to need to pick which objections make the most sense and which ones are you able to better respond to in the scheme of things. So we'll be looking more at that as we go through the course.